Today, we're diving into the epic story of a dream. It's the story of a brand new nation, India, aiming for total industrial self-reliance. And we're going to see it all through the eyes of one of its most legendary companies. Let's get into the story of HMT. This one phrase from India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, just says it all. When he said temples of modern India, he wasn't just talking about dams or factories. He was painting a picture of a grand vision. For him, these huge state-owned companies, these public sector undertakings, were going to be the sacred foundations for a brand new industrial India. All right, so let's dig into that big dream. What was the grand ambition behind creating these industrial giants in the first place? Well, the mission was frankly breathtaking. The whole idea was to build companies that could make everything the country needed, literally from scratch. This is how giants like Hindustan Machine Tools, or HMT, were born back in 1953. Their job? To build the mother machines. The machines that build other machines, which would then go on to build the entire country. And in this massive industrial story, HMT wasn't just some background player. Oh no, it quickly became the star of the show. It became more than a company, it was a symbol, a household name. That's right, HMT was literally celebrated as the jewel of the nation. It was proof of India's new engineering power. For decades, if you owned an HMT watch or an HMT tractor, you weren't just a customer. You were buying a piece of the national dream. And just look at the sheer scale of HMT's ambition. This list is incredible. It goes from absolutely massive industrial gear, we're talking giant presses, grinders, complex CNC systems, all the way down to tractors for the fields, and of course, the watches on millions of people's wrists. It's hard to even wrap your head around it. HMT was a single company making one of the widest ranges of products in the entire world, a true industrial behemoth. But you know how it goes. Grand visions often hit a wall of reality. By the late 20th century, economic pressures, starting with a recession way back in '67, started to show the cracks in these temples. The whole strategy just had to change. And this document right here really tells that story. It's an annual report from the Ministry of Heavy Industries, but it's so much more than that. It's basically the government putting on paper for everyone to see that the old strategy of just building, no matter the cost, just wasn't going to work anymore. So what this really boils down to is a massive pivot. That initial, almost romantic vision of nation building was forced to meet a much harsher economic reality. The new strategy? It was all about performance and, well, making money. The dream now had to pay its own bills. And this new thinking led to a really stark 3-point mandate from the ministry. For any struggling public company, there were now only 3 paths forward. 1. Revive it if you can. 2. If it's a lost cause, shut it down. And 3. Disinvest, sell off the government's share. The message couldn't be clearer. Profitability was now the name of the game. So, to really understand what this felt like on the ground, let's zoom in on one specific story. The story of Praga Tools, a smaller company owned by the mighty HMT. This timeline really tells a dramatic story, doesn't it? Praga Tools had been around a long time, founded even before India became independent. HMT scooped it up in '86, but by 1999 it got slapped with that dreaded official label, a sick unit. And the final chapter? Selling off its most valuable asset, its land. And here's where the tension really builds. Because right up until the end, this is how Praga Tools talked about itself. It was all about a legacy of precision and dependability. This was its identity, its history, its DNA. But that proud history ran headfirst into some cold, hard facts. This quote from news reports at the time just shows the painful new reality. The conversation had totally shifted from proven performance to just another sick unit being forced to sell its land to stay afloat. And this is the official seal that made it all real. Being sent to the BIFR, that was the formal bureaucratic confirmation that Praga Tools was in deep, deep trouble. And this wasn't just some piece of paper. For the thousands of employees, this was a terrifying signal that the company they'd spent their lives building might just disappear. And this is what it all came down to in the end. 87 crore rupees. That's 870 million rupees. That's how much Praga Tools got for selling 13.7 acres of prime real estate in Hyderabad. The factory floors fell silent, the land was sold, and soon modern office park stood where a temple of industry once was. Okay, so let's zoom back out. What does this one story, the story of HMT and Praga tools, really tell us about India's huge economic transformation? Well, there are a few key takeaways here. First, those temples of modern India had to learn to become real businesses, a massive shift from just nation building to actually surviving in a competitive market. This also meant the very idea of a national asset changed. It wasn't always the factory anymore. Sometimes it was the valuable land the factory sat on. And of course, this all came at a very real human cost, with painful choices like manpower rationalization, which is corporate speak for thousands of lifelong employees taking buyouts to leave. But, and this is a really important but, we have to remember that these giants, these temples, they ultimately did their job. They built the industrial foundation that today's much more dynamic Indian economy stands on. And that leaves us with this final, massive question. The story of HMT is really the story of a nation growing up, moving from pure idealism to tough pragmatism. It really forces us to ask, how should any nation, new or old, strike that incredibly difficult balance between its biggest, boldest industrial dreams and the cold, hard facts of economic reality?